It is 2 a.m. in New York, 11 in Sochi, and 4 on a Friday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Gun-young. This is ARIRANG, Korea's only global network. Now, high-level officials from the two Koreas met again at the Truce village of Panmunjom early this Friday morning for the second time in just 3 days. The two sides wrapped up the talks a few hours ago for today, and for the details on their discussions, let's go live to our correspondent Hwang Sung-hee at Seoul's Unification Ministry. Sung-hee, so are we getting any word on the outcome of those talks?
Not yet, Keqiang, but the officials held just one session and one round of separate discussions between the two chief delegates today, with the meeting coming to an end at 1:15 p.m. But the officials did reach some kind of an agreement. Although details of the agreement has not been released yet, an official at the Unification Ministry says that the general atmosphere of the meeting was very amicable. The two sides are believed to have focused on narrowing their differences on the upcoming reunions for families separated since the Korean War and the joint military drills between Seoul and Washington. Now, at issue is North Korea's demand that the South postpone the key resolve and full legal exercises to sometime after the family reunions take place. The reunion event is scheduled to take place from February 20th to the 25th, and this overlaps with the military drills that begin at the end of the month. So the big question now is whether the two Koreas were able to reach a compromise. Keqiang?
Now, Sung-hee, we have less than a week until the resumption of the family reunions, which is, of course, next Thursday, I think. How likely is it that they will take place as planned?
Keqiang, South Korea's presidential office of Cheongwade said earlier this morning that it will not let the upcoming joint military drills disrupt plans for the family reunions and vice versa. So if the family reunions take place next week as planned, it will be the first such event in more than 3 years. But then again, we must remember that North Korea has a history of breaking promises, and we saw the regime walk away from its agreement to resume family reunions last September, just days before the event. Meanwhile, the Koreas are continuing their preparations for the upcoming family reunions. South Korea's Unification Ministry said earlier this morning that a 15-member delegation will depart for Mount Keqiang, the site of the reunion, tomorrow to prepare for the event. The South Korean Chief Delegate Kim Kyu-hyun is expected to give a press briefing here at the Unification Ministry when he returns in maybe just about an hour. So hopefully I'll have more details for you in our later newscast. Keqiang?
All right, Sung-hee, we will be waiting for that update from you. That was ARIRANG News Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee with the latest on today's hastily scheduled inter-Korean talks. Now, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry called on South Korea and Japan to iron out their differences on history issues before wrapping up his 2-day visit to Seoul. Our Ji Myung-gil has more.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said it is up to South Korea and Japan to overcome their differences on matters related to history and forge a more positive relationship before wrapping up a 2-day visit to Seoul and heading to Beijing.
So, while the United States obviously has a strong interest in the relationship and in the security component of the relationship, it's up to Japan and the Republic of Korea to put history behind them and move the relationship forward.
Relations between Seoul and Tokyo have fractured in recent weeks over Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's visit to the controversial Yasukuni Shrine last December and separate claims to the Korea-controlled Dokdo Island. Kerry also said the ongoing animosity undermines trilateral cooperation between the U.S., South Korea, and Japan in dealing with the provocative North. Kerry also met with President Park Geun-hye and other key officials during his 2-day stay and reaffirmed that Seoul and Washington are in agreement when it comes to the denuclearization of North Korea.
Today, we reaffirm our commitment to a common goal, which is the verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula in a peaceful manner, and we are committed to going to talks only if there is a clarity with respect to the steps that need to be taken for denuclearization by the North.
He also said China can do more now to urge North Korea to begin taking action to come into compliance with its international obligations. This was Kerry's second visit to Seoul and his fifth trip to Asia as the top U.S. diplomat. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
And Secretary of State Kerry is currently in Beijing meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Now, during his two-day visit in China, the U.S. envoy is expected to urge Beijing to do more to persuade North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons. He'll also likely emphasize Beijing's role in resolving the historical and territorial disputes in Northeast Asia. Now, after his meeting with President Xi, he's scheduled to have several meetings with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi, Premier Keqiang, and State Councilor Jiechi. Kerry travels to Jakarta on Saturday. Meanwhile, over in North Korea, that regime appears to have accelerated excavation at its nuclear bomb testing site in the northeast of the country, but a test is not believed to be imminent. Referring to its new satellite images, the U.S. Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins University says North Korea likely started work last May on a new tunnel at its Punggye site, where it has conducted its 3 previous nuclear tests, the most recent being in February 2013. The institute estimates the pile of earth excavated from the tunnel has doubled over the last few weeks. The institute adds it's unlikely Pyongyang intends to use this tunnel for its next nuclear test, since 2 other tunnels at the site appear to be complete.
With rapid changes in the global economy, up-to-date business and financial news has never been more essential. See what's making markets tick around the globe. We speak to the experts and cover the biggest financial stories.
North Korea provocation.
Quite good. We received a lot of positive feedback, especially from those abroad.
Korea's public sector debt was over 820 trillion won. Now that's roughly $770 billion US in 2012, or around $15,000 of debt per capita. And this is according to new government data. ARIRANG's Wang Yi has the details.
Korea's public sector debt represented 64.5% of the nation's gross domestic product in 2012. The finance ministry said Friday that the total amount of debt owed by the central and provincial governments and non-financial state-run companies stood at over 820 trillion won, or roughly $770 billion US as of the end of 2012. That is up more than $63 billion from the previous year. The ministry said the debt figures represent new government data that's based on the latest international guidelines set by the International Monetary Fund. The data excludes money borrowed by state-run financial companies like the Bank of Korea and the Korea Exim Bank. The ministry explained that including the debt of state-run financial companies could distort the final figures because their deposits are counted as debt. With the new data, the ministry aims to offer the public a clearer picture of the debt situation in the public sector and encourage public sector businesses to operate more transparently. The Korean government recently launched a drive to reform the nation's public organizations, urging them to reduce debt and streamline their business operations. The nation's public organizations have been facing mounting criticism for having lax management despite their growing debt. The IMF said that the new government data is a measure of the administration's will to make data collection practices more transparent and bring them in line with international standards. Wang Yi, ARIRANG News.
The government will implement a new system that would allow local governments to declare themselves bankrupt. The Public Administration Ministry presented the plan to President Park on Friday, which aims to restore local governments' financial health. Now, it will also hold the local government heads responsible for their poor fiscal management rather than putting the burden on the public. Once a bankruptcy is declared, the central government or a higher level office will intervene to reform the local government's finances. President Park had previously said local governments' lax financial management practices are a big burden to the nation and ordered the ministry to implement strong measures to control local government debt, which had ballooned to $4.7 billion as of 2012. Now, a 3-month suspension of businesses at the 3 leading credit card companies hit by the worst data leak in the country's history starts next Monday, amid efforts by financial regulators to better protect the public's personal information. Our Councilor reports.
3 months of not doing business. That's the punishment KB Gungmin Card, NH Nongyop Card, and Lotte Card will get for their involvement in the biggest personal data leak in Korean history. The Financial Supervisory Service said Friday a proposed suspension of business at the 3 companies will start Monday and continue to May 16th. The main focus of the suspension is on banning the companies from taking on new customers. Providing credit card loans and cash advances to new contractors will also be forbidden. Existing customers, however, won't feel the effects of the ban as they will be provided with financial services as usual. The suspension will also exclude operations related to the public interest, such as the issuance of student identification cards. In the end, the suspension is expected to cost the 3 companies 100,000 clients a month and a combined 50 billion won or $47 million during the 3-month period. An official at the Financial Services Commission referred to it as the harshest penalty the firms could have received, not only because of the losses incurred, but because 3 months is the longest suspension allowed by law. The suspension is expected to be finalized by the FSC at a meeting on Sunday, and in the coming month, the FSC will also consider recommendations for dismissals of CEOs and executives deemed responsible for the leak. In related news, a suspension of telemarketing operations at financial and insurance companies put in place as a preventative measure at the end of last month was lifted on Friday, thanks to indemnity reports submitted by company executives. 권소아, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now we turn to business today. First, a look at the local bourse. Seoul shares rose to their highest close this month as risk sentiment encouraged investors to pick up heavyweights like Hyundai Motor here on the local bourse. Now at the closing bell, the benchmark Kospi was trading up by 0.7% and closed at 1940, while the tech-heavy Kosdaq also finished about 0.15% higher. Now on the foreign exchange counter, the Korean currency closed stronger against the greenback at roughly 1,064 won. We reported yesterday that Korea has initialed yet another bilateral free trade agreement, this time with Australia, while agreeing to formally sign the trade pact within the next 4 months. For an in-depth analysis on Seoul's impending FTA with Canberra, we're joined live in the studio by Dr. Kim Byung-ju, the head of KLMP Consulting and our regular commentator on this program. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
Now, the Korea-Australia FTA has gone through the initial process, initializing process.
Right.
Now, how significant is this compared to the many FTAs Korea already has?
Many FTAs means probably this is the 11th one, so we have so many. It's not the biggest, for sure. We have FTA with the United States and EU, and with China, one is coming in as well. But it is one of the largest indeed. Combined GDP size of $3 trillion US, and for that matter as a whole is a big deal. And also in terms of compatibleness, compatibility between the economy, this really stands out because Korea really has a lot to gain in terms of automobiles and IT, which are the key industries for the nation. And Australia could provide, the agricultural goods as well as minerals, natural resources in a cheaper price to Korean economy. So this is a very compatible arrangement that we have, and then there are a lot of gains that are expected. As I said, on the automobile side, Korea is expecting big gain because in terms of like a value, 3/4 of Korea's exports to Australia will get to enjoy immediate elimination of the tariffs. So that means a lot of gain here. And IT products, not to mention that. The thing is, however, on the agricultural side, Australia already has close to or over 50% of Korea's imported beef market. And they are coming in. Of course, I think Australia has come up with a great compromise for the interest of Korea, because they have agreed on a much longer time horizon, like over 10 years of phasing out the tariff. But because their presence in terms of their beef here is so strong, we are expecting a big gain over time for Australian agricultural products as well as their mineral and natural resources here.
So hopefully on the part of Korea, we'll see more Korean-made cars running on the streets of Australia. Now, like you mentioned, the agriculture sector, it seems like every time Korea signs an FTA with some other country, the farmers are the ones unhappiest ones among many. So in this case, they will be less unhappy, I suppose.
Well, the thing is, the opposition would be about the same as any other ones. Of course, we have had a really fierce opposition before against the FTA with the United States, and also considerable opposition to EU. And now the opposition against the one with China will be very strong as well. But for this one with Australia, the farmers groups are talking very tough about their possible opposition in the way of ratification. So there's nothing that could be guaranteed, politically speaking. And opposition party is raising big time their voice about the need for greater compensation for the farmers, and they say they're going to let this one go through the National Assembly without considerable action from the government. So this one, we will get to see another major round of fight over the compensation.
Well, the compensations for FTA-related compensations for different sectors that will be hit hard by the FTA, we have heard government vows and pledges to do so, but how effective have they been?
That's a very big and important question, because from what I remember, the first ever FTA that Korea had set up with the country was Chile. And at that time, Korean government promised about 1 trillion won spending in terms of helping farmers for the following 7 years. Well, actually, that amount sounds pretty big, but that was very much overwhelmed by what the Korean government promised to the Korean farmers when the U.S.-Korea FTA was set up. First, they began talking about 10 trillion won spending on compensation, and then later they increased to 20 trillion won spending. So these are enormous amount of money. However, though, in my recollection, I have not heard any critical assessments of the effectiveness of this kind of spending, and no evaluation that I know of that has significance that could lend any sense of balance here in terms about the question of how wisely this money has been spent. We have many cases about money being wasted in a similar form after 1995 Uruguay round, the launching of WTO, and we have all these interesting stories about how this money was spent and so ineffectively. But based on those lessons, I don't think any action has been taken so far, and Korean government has been continuously talking about compensation without really serious evaluation.
Now, so without any evidence on the effectiveness of these compensations, why do we always face such calls for agricultural compensation?
I mean, simply speaking, this is a critical, simple case of over-representation of agricultural interests. If you count 300 or so lawmakers here in Korea, majority represents farmer interest, even though the farming industry here in Korea itself is way less than 10%, 7, 8, or maybe 5% of their national GDP. Their representation at the National Assembly is very big, and that's why we see those kind of actions that we see on the screen right here, lawmakers protesting against opening up the agricultural market. And so it's the system issue here, and unless we address that kind of over-representation issue here, we can't really see much change here, because silent majority will just keep quiet anyway, because they're talking about so-called weaker parties.
So even with or without FTAs or FTA compensations, what is the future of the agriculture sector looking like for this country?
That question has been out there for quite some time so far. What I know is young farmers who have actually moved from the cities to rural areas with special attention to the latest techniques and so on, they seem to be doing pretty well. And their earning level seems to be considerably high. The question is the rest of them, the majority of the farmers who are fast aging, whose children are actually leaving the rural areas for seeking jobs in the cities. So helping these fast-aging farmers are the real questions here. So what I'm thinking is, in order to ensure a better future for the Korean agriculture, the younger farmers who are already there and set up their plans of competing and thriving, they're doing fine. The focus should be on those fast-aging farmers rather than just promising continuously about with the quantitative amount of money the government can offer. I think they should come up with more focused programs to help these fast-aging farmers and how they can survive during the rest of their lives. I think we really need those kind of focused approach here.
Right, so that they could gain that competitive edge and expertise and the skills that they can thrive and survive as farmers in this country.
Right. The thing is, these people are already pretty much aged, so just for the rest of their lives, they can have enough of happiness and well-being. So that's my focus here.
All right, Dr. Kim Byung-ju, thank you so much for today, and we'll talk to you on Monday.
Okay.
Well, over in Sochi, it is day 8, but day 7 of medal events. However, Thursday was a very rough day in the tumbling world of short track and other speed skating events. For that and what we can expect for today, we have our Lee Tae-ho on that coverage.
Good afternoon, everybody, and kicking off today's coverage of the Sochi 2014 Winter Olympics, we start off with the results of the chaotic women's 500-meter short track event. Now, Park Seung-hee of Team Korea had the lead going into the finals, but the two skaters behind her got entangled, resulting in a crash that took down Park with them. However, she did pick herself up and was the last skater to cross the finish line. The judges ruled that Britain's Elise Christie, who crossed the line second, was the cause of the crash, and she was therefore disqualified. That means the silver went to Arianna Fontana of Italy and the bronze to Park. This was the first medal for Korea in the women's 500-meter short track event in 16 long years. Unfortunately, due to a knee injury sustained during the crash, Park was withdrawn from her second scheduled event, the 1500 meters. Now for an update on Korea's national curling team, affectionately being called Curls Day, a spoof, of course, of the K-pop girl group Girls' Day. In what was a must-win situation after falling to the #1 ranked Swedes yesterday, the Korean national team headed into their round-robin session 6 against the home team Russia, amidst great turmoil over the status of their team members. And despite the immense pressure of suddenly being thrust into the limelight, the ladies of Team Korea pulled out a spectacular victory over Russia, 8-4. And with their record at 2 wins and 2 losses, they must win their next 4 matches in order to keep their medal hopes alive. And now we shift over to the results of the women's 1,000-meter skating event. Now, after claiming her second consecutive gold medal in the 500, our very own Lee Sang-hwa took part in the 1,000, placing 12th overall with a time of 1 minute 15.94 seconds, wrapping up the last of her competitions in this year's Winter Games. Congratulations to Lee once again on her gold medal in the 500 and a job well done in the 1,000. We hope to see a repeat performance at the 2018 Games right here in Pyeongchang, Korea. And the anticipation for the women's individual skating event is starting to ramp up. One of the most popular sports figures in all of the world, figure skating queen Kim Yeona held her first open practice in front of a dozen cameras. Now, this was interesting indeed, since many of her competitors are not practicing at Sochi, but in nearby countries in order to keep their practices as close as possible. But befitting of the queen, she confidently went through her program, landing her classic triple-triple combinations with ease, and even met with reporters after the practice session, stating that she did not like the ice conditions and would like to have to adjust to the ice conditions. And with that, we wrap up this week's coverage of Sochi 2014 by taking a look at today's events to watch for and the current medal standings. I was Lee Tae-ho bringing you all of the latest, and I'll see you again on Monday.
Now, today here in Korea, we mark 정월 대보름, which is when we get to see the first full moon of the year according to the lunar calendar. So will we get to see the full moon in the skies? Well, here now is a look at the weather conditions in your neck of the woods. That brings us to the end of this newscast, but stay tuned to ARIRANG. We have a lot more coming your way on Early Edition at 6.